The time is at hand.
The elusive dog-like creature attacks livestock, bleeding them dry of blood.
8 to 10 feet tall, shadowy aliens.
The appearance of a mysterious monolith.
Making it rain by zapping clouds.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
Welcome to In Dark Places. I'm your Huckleberry, Jumbo Fugit. Hey, I mentioned I was sick last week or the week before or something. And I got Brandon sick, and he got my wife sick. And I think she's getting me sick again. So we're just going to pass this back and forth all winter long, I think. So I'm probably just going to always sound sick until around April, I guess. But we have news. The clowns are at it again. Machete-wielding clown menaces Atlanta man by Tim Banal. In a weird story out of Atlanta, a man claims that he recently had a terrifying encounter with a machete-wielding clown that chased him down the street, according to a local media report. Thanks, local media report. The bizarre incident occurred earlier this month when the unnamed witness left his apartment for a walk. Alas, the normally routine afternoon stroll took an unsettling turn with the sudden appearance of what he described as a well-dressed man with a clown mask and a tricycle. Like a scene out of a horror movie, the haunting Harlequin initially appeared mirthful, making some fanciful maneuvers. However, the unsettling stranger quickly became menacing after it began suddenly venturing toward the astounded witness. "I'm literally thinking it's a prank," the man said, though his suspicions soon turned to concern when the approaching clown revealed a machete. At that point, the witness said, "I was scared for my life," as the weapon-wielding Harlequin managed to get within a few feet and started swinging the sword at him. Incredibly, the showdown escalated even further as the man just so happened to be armed as well. "I pulled out my gun and said, 'Please leave me alone,'" he recalled, lamenting that the firearm did little to dissuade the persistent stranger. "He still came after me," the man told the local TV station, which led to him fleeing the scene with the clown in hot pursuit. The chase brought the pair to a busy street where the man managed to escape the machete-wielding weirdo, who was nearly hit by a car. While one might find the extraordinary tale hard to believe, others in the neighborhood have also reported encountering the unhinged clown, leading to a warning about the clown being issued by multiple area apartment complexes. Meanwhile, authorities are investigating the matter. Looking back on the unnerving experience, the man marveled that he managed to escape the close encounter with the clown unscathed. One imagines the clown might feel the same way, considering that the jester was staring down the barrel of a gun that the witness commendedly opted not to fire. You hear a lot about UFOs shooting down beams of light. We've had several of those kind of cases in the Appalachian UFO Research Society. Our friend James saw a beam of light shoot out of a UFO one time. I think it was around 2008. I've seen a lot of UFOs, but I don't really remember ever seeing a beam of light shoot out of one. But this week, we are talking about beams of light shooting out of UFOs. And sometimes UFOs are reported to deflect light beams, defying known physical laws. Charles Bowen relates a case from Australia and another with many witnesses from France. Thanks, Charles. Newcomers to ufological research, accustomed to conventional physics, often throw up their hands in incredulity when they are confronted with reports of the extraordinary phenomenon that occurred during UFO sightings. Among the most remarkable of these are accounts of beams of light that stop short or make abrupt bends without any evident absorbing, refracting, or reflecting agencies to bring this about. The Trancas event in Argentina was a noteworthy example. In that case, tubes of light were extended from UFOs, bent to curves, and withdrawn. In the two cases discussed here, beams from torches and car headlamps were manipulated in equally impossible ways. The London Daily Express of April 12, 1966 carried a story in which it reported that a motorist named Ronald Sullivan, aged 38, had been cruising along near Bendigo in southern Australia under a moonlit sky when, inexplicably, his headlight beams bent to the right. In a statement to the police at Maryborough, near Melbourne, he said that he avoided a crash only with difficulty, and as he drew to a halt, saw a display of gaseous lights and of all colors of the rainbow in a field alongside the road. The display followed by the appearance of an object that rose vertically about 10 feet into the air and then disappeared. When Mr. Sullivan returned to the scene a few days later, he found that another motorist, Gary Turner, had been killed in a crash at the same spot the previous evening. Meanwhile, the police had made their investigation and found in a freshly plowed field 50 feet from the fence a circular depression about 5 feet across and varying from 2 to 5 inches in depth. The police regarded Sullivan, a highly respected businessman, as a reliable witness and noted that he professed not to believe in UFOs. The Daily Express story ended there. The corresponding Associated Press message was more detailed. Apparently, Mr. Sullivan's encounter took place on April 4th, 1966. He returned to the site on April 8th, and it was then that he learned of the fatal accident that had taken place on April 7th. A report in the Melbourne Herald added that he had driven to nearby Whitechaproof, where he had had his headlights checked. They were found to be in perfect working order before going on to the police. It was also revealed that the bent beams incident and the fatal accident occurred on a long stretch of road between Bendigo and St. Arnold, at a point of 9 miles east of Billiba, a small town nearly 130 miles northwest of Melbourne. The information that was available left it a matter of speculation whether the bending of the headlight beams was accidentally caused by Mr. Sullivan's car running into the UFO's force field, or whether if the incidents of the 4th and 7th of April were connected in some way. The bending was a result of a deliberate action by a hostile agency, human railing. In a commentary in Flying Saucer Review, scientist Stephen L. Smith deplored the absence from the reports of important details such as the make of Mr. Sullivan's car, the kind of dipping mechanism employed in his headlights, and the exact position on the beams at which they were bent. He pointed out that there were 3 possible explanations: that the beams were bent at source, that the bending occurred somewhere along the beams, or that the beams appeared bent through illusion or hallucination. Mr. Smith wrote that his colleagues of the Cambridge University Investigation Group had suggested how an illusion might be brought about by a sudden extinguishing of the left-hand component of the headlight beam, which, through its divergent character, would seem to have bent to the right, due to a freak reflection caused by the absence of dust particles by which headlight beams are normally seen. Yeah, that'll happen. If hallucination were the cause of the phenomenon, then it was spontaneously generated in the witness's brain. Or was it caused by some outside agency, perhaps a force field, emanating from the object he had observed? People from all walks of life, most of them young folk, had gathered at the French spiritual center of Thalys, some 6 miles north of Cluny, in eastern France, on August 11th, 1972. Thalys is a Protestant monastery, and the gathering there was for celebrations organized by its founder, Friar Roger Schultz. The events at Thalys in the early hours of August 12th 1972 were reported to the Gendarmerie at Cluny, and afterward to the French UFO organization Lumineros dans la Nuit, for whom an investigation was conducted by a schoolmaster named Tyrode. A group of about 35 young people had collected for discussion at a rustic open-air theater situated among the visitors' tents near the crest of a ridge on which the community's buildings also stood. The site faced westward over a gently sloping valley and a ridge known as La Crasse, and successively higher ridges beyond that. The sky was overcast, and a light drizzle soon began to fall. From the place where the earnest young debaters were grouped, a large plowed field sloped down into the valley. A Monsieur F. Tantot from Macon, a young man from Dijon, and an Italian student were alerted at about 2 a.m. by Mademoiselle Renente from Sardinia to a star that she could see descending. Before the others could swing around, however, she was already telling them that it had landed. In a few moments, all the people in the theater could see the object, seemingly stationary on the slopes of La Crosse, facing them and at the same level as themselves. All present also heard the whistling noise as the UFO approached, and they can now see that it was bounded to the left by a field of cereal. Its light color showed the UFO up as dark by contrast, and to the right by a large tree standing on the ridge. The size of the UFO was estimated to be larger than a couch, or at least 30 yards long. All the witnesses now saw the UFO light up. 7 yellow lights appeared in a row, then 2 orange lights outside and to the left of the object. After that, 5 of the yellow lights began to emit beams that extended slowly to the ground. What appeared to be cupolas were observed above the 2 light beams at the very left of the row. When discussing the phenomenon with M. Tyrode, some of the witnesses said that they had the impression that the beams were pylons on which the object was supported. Indeed, it was as if the beams were made of a solid matter. At this point, some of the witnesses, particularly Tantot and the man from Dijon, felt tingling in their fingers and knees. While the solid beams of light were extending to the ground, a train of red sparks was seen at the right-hand end of the object. These were soon extinguished, and where they had been, there were now seen 3 small discs, each with 2 red points of light. These began to gyrate around the main UFO, and these maneuvers went on until the end of the sighting. At about 3 a.m., the 4 original witnesses decided to have a closer look at the big object and, armed with torches, set off across the field, watched as they went by the remaining 30 witnesses in the theater. These were later able to report that the main beams were rotating around individual vertical axes. The beam second from the left suddenly grew brighter, and showers of red particles filled the air around the 4 and covered the ground. A row of what looked like poreholes opened up in white light, only to disappear after 20 minutes, when the large beam to the left flashed several times. By now the intrepid 4 had reached the middle of the field, and they had become aware of a dark haystack-shaped mass, some 6 to 7 yards high, around which a point of red light moved in a haphazard trajectory. Between themselves and this mass, the witnesses thought they could see a hedge about 10 feet ahead of them, at a point where they knew no hedge existed. When a torch beam was shown toward the mass, the beam suddenly turned vertically upward, about 1 foot 6 inches from the hedge, and, dispersing, was lost in the air. Subsequent attempts to illuminate the object with all the torches the witnesses had with them met with the same fate, and, alarmed in the fate of the bizarre unknown, the 4 were tempted to back off. However, when the lights on the UFO suddenly went out, only to flash back on again, and the 3 discs vanished into the big object, M. Tantot flashed his torch in the direction. As if in response, the largest beam of the UFO rose, so that it shone directly at the witnesses. Dazzled and feeling a surge of heat, they raised their hands to protect their eyes. Meanwhile, the UFO began to move away until suddenly it accelerated and sped off toward Cluny. The time was 4:40 a.m. when it was lost from sight at Tazi. What if we tune to Reddit and see if they have any stories of beams of light? Beam of light filled with UFOs over Lake Superior. I was camping this weekend, that was 2 years ago, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan when I saw a beam of light from the sky. It was not completely vertical. It appeared to be connecting to Lake Superior. It was filled with moving UFOs. They were coming from the sky and going through the light beam in single file at a very, very fast rate of speed. I must have seen 50 crafts in total at one time through the beam with a constant flow. Hundreds of crafts passed through. They were disappearing behind the trees/horizon. The craft stopped coming, then the beam grew dimmer until it was gone. I had 2 other people with me that witnessed it. It was my stepkids and I. The 9-year-old boy said, "What is that?" And the beam of light scared them and they started crying. We prayed. We are fine, but no one will ever believe us. I completely understand too. I had my phone charging in the car and I thought about grabbing it, but it was too crazy and I couldn't take my eyes off from it. I was almost in shock. I live with seagulls all around me every day. I know what I saw, and it appeared as though it were the stars themselves. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. This story is by Phenomenon. I don't know. In the early hours of April 3rd, 1976, one of the most impressive cases in Brazilian ufology, perhaps even the world, occurred. On this date, several residents of the city of Quixada Serra witnessed the evolution of an unidentified object flying over the city. For one of these witnesses, the case meant much more than a simple sighting, so common in the region. It represented a radical change in the life of a man who had been in excellent health before the contact, and who gradually showed symptoms of some type of syndrome or disease unknown to earthly medicine. The events of that day began around 4:30 a.m. when shooters from the 116th shooting range were having an outdoor physical education session. Everyone was amazed to see a large disc-shaped flying object appear gliding just a few meters above the ground, emitting intense light and completely silent. The soldiers thought it was some kind of device launched from the Maria de Inferno, or even government devices launched to conduct research in the region. At the same time, in another part of the city, a man named Luis Barroso Fernandez was preparing to go to his farm, located a few kilometers from the city. He hitched up his cart, said goodbye to his wife, and continued on his journey, still in the darkness of the early morning. After traveling for approximately 100 kilometers, Barroso heard a buzzing sound similar to a swarm of bees. He looked back, saw nothing, and decided to continue on his journey. Suddenly, a flying object appeared, 3 meters in diameter, appeared above him. Frightened, Barroso pulled the reins and stopped to observe the strange device that slowly descended in front of him, about 30 meters away. At that moment, the animal stepped back, apparently frightened by the presence of the object. Suddenly, the device emitted a beam of light that struck the animal and the owner, who immediately became paralyzed. A door opened from the device, and 2 small beings emerged. One of them was holding an object similar to a flashlight, which he pointed and fired a beam of light that hit Luis Barroso in the face. Luis Barroso immediately lost consciousness. When he came to, he realized that he was far from where he had stopped his carriage. He felt dizzy, shaky, and his face was burning. He also had difficulty breathing and an intense headache. The left side of his body was red, and he had difficulty moving in the carriage. Shortly after, a cowboy passed by the area and noticed that Luis Barroso was not well and asked him what was wrong. He asked the cowboy to take him home, where, upon arriving, he told him about his extraordinary experience. Still feeling unwell As a result of the contact, he asked his wife to take him to be examined by Dr. Antonio Mario Magalhaes, who was one of the most respected doctors in the city. He listened attentively to Luis Barroso's story, and although he did not believe in flying saucers at the time, he considered that something very serious must have happened to the farmer, since he had a high level of credibility in the city. He recorded all the information in the medical record and prescribed an antihistamine, a tranquilizer, and complete rest. Upon returning home, Barroso continued to feel unwell, with constant pain throughout his body. His eyes burned a lot, and the left side of his body remained red. His story spread throughout the city, and several people went to the witness's house to hear his story firsthand. Somehow, the stories about the sighting reached the state capital, Fortaleza, where local radio stations and newspapers reported the episode. As a result, ufologists from the Center for Ufological Research in Fortaleza went to the city to investigate the incident. The researchers found a worried Luis Barroso, who tried to avoid interviews and photographs, asking everyone to forget about his case. Even though they were visibly uncomfortable with the situation, Barroso's family greeted all curious people politely and respectfully. After some time, the story cooled down in the city, and Barroso's life apparently returned to normal. However, Luis Barroso's life would never be the same again. A few days after the contact, his hair turned gray. He began to feel helpless and, at times, spaced out. He felt very unwell and had memory lapses, causing concern in his family. In light of this, they took Barroso for another appointment with Dr. Magalhaes. He saw him and tried to treat the protagonist of the case, but to no avail. In the following days, the symptoms intensified, surprising the experienced doctor, who referred the patient to the capital, Fortaleza, where he could receive better care. In the referral form, in the INPS medical records, he included Luis Barroso's account, even stating verbatim that he had been kidnapped by a flying saucer. In Fortaleza, he was treated by doctors Jose Pellegrino Alves and Calobo Lobo, who are trained in neurological and psychiatry. In light of the medical records, they criticized the content of Luis Barroso's account and the doctor's position for having believed the story, and attributed the incident to a common mental problem. In the period that followed, the doctors were unable to provide a clear and precise diagnosis and sent him back to Quaxada without being able to solve the problem. They simply prescribed that he stay away from work. As Barroso's condition worsened, his family decided to admit him to the psychiatric hospital in Fortaleza, located on Avenida Breza de Menezes in the Salgado neighborhood, where he was treated by 16 specialized doctors, who were also unable to provide an accurate diagnosis. The UFO Research Center followed the family's drama and the worsening of Luis Barroso's clinical condition. The center's ufologists interviewed people connected to the case and tried to arrange regressive hypnosis. At the time, there were 2 people who could perform the procedure: a Jesuit priest who refused to perform hypnosis on a person that had contact with flying saucers, and a dentist who asked for a high price that the center could not afford. Therefore, there was no regressive hypnosis for Luis Barroso. Dr. Magalhaes also began to monitor Luis Barroso Fernandez's health, providing all possible medical assistance according to his condition. He was able to observe the worsening of his condition, with the accumulation of water in the patient's body, the appearance of edema, worsening memory lapses, and a growing loss of locomotor ability. No attempts to clarify or diagnose his strange illness were made without reaching a conclusion. An electroencephalogram, urine, glucose, and cholesterol tests, among other clinical analyses, were performed, which proved that Barroso's health was perfect, except for his brain, which had been affected in some way, in an abnormal manner. In the best possible description, Barroso demonstrated a mental regression, apparently irreversible. Over time, he began to act like a child. At the end of his life, in 1993, he could only say 3 words: mommy, da, and fear. He always mentioned the latter when someone took a photograph with a flash, highlighting some type of trauma with strong or intense light. Luis Barroso Fernandez passed away on April 1st, 1993. At the time of his death in 1993, he had baby smooth skin. In addition to the physiological effects observed in Luis Barroso Fernandez, there were other direct and indirect confirmations of his testimony. The donkey that was pulling the cart in the early hours of the morning when the incident occurred also appeared weak after the incident. He didn't eat for a few days, but recovered after some time. According to research conducted by the UFO Research Center in Fortaleza, Saraya, other people have witnessed the presence of a UFO in the skies of Quixada. The most significant experience involved two people, student Francesca Rosetta de Silva, 23, and her brother Antonio Levedo de Silva, 12. Both were on their way to a class at the Quixada State School. Shortly after leaving home, they saw a very bright floating light in the middle of the forest. A ray of light came from the light and struck Francesca in the face. Feeling dizzy, they decided to go back home. Antonio helped his sister, holding her by the arm. When she reached the door of the house, Francesca fainted, leaving her father and brother astonished. Her father, Antonio Fernandez de Silva, took her to the hospital where she was treated by a nurse on duty. He found that Francesca's eyes were swollen and that she had several bruises on her body, as well as scratches caused by plants in the region. According to Dr. Lacerio de Castro, then director of the hospital, Francesca was very nervous and her eyes were swollen, as if she had been affected by intense heat. Francesca's brother, Antonio Luida, had no wounds or bruises. However, he had suffered psychological trauma as a result of the experience. I never want to see what I saw again. It wasn't a plane, a helicopter, or anything else I know. It was strange and threatening. So what do you think about that? Cool little stories of UFOs shooting light beams. Have you ever seen a UFO shoot a beam of light out? We'd love to hear about it. Send an email to indarkplacespod@hotmail.com. That's all of the big show for this week. Kind of short and sweet. Maybe I'll not be so snotty next week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week. God bless.